Dear children, a warm welcome to a new video on Principles of Management. This is chapters 2 of grade 12 business studies. So it's a very interesting chapter. Let us understand what do you mean by the word principle. So dear students, a principle is a fundamental statement of truth that provides guidance to thought and action. Now let us see what do you mean by principles of management. So here principles of management are broad and general guidelines for managerial decision making and behavior. That is, they guide the practice of management in an organization. So let us look into these principles. The first principle talks about universal applicability, general guidelines found by practice and experimentation, flexibility, mainly behavior, cause and effect relationship, contingent. Now we'll discuss these principles in detail. Moving on to the first principle, which is called as universal applicability. Principles of management can be applied in all types of organizations, business as well as non-business, small as well as large enterprises. Moving on to the second point that talks about general guidelines. Business principles are general guidelines to action and decision making. However, they do not provide any ready-made solution, as we all know that the business environment is ever-changing or dynamic. Moving on to the fourth principle that talks about flexibility. So these principles can be adapted by managers and it can be modified as per the demands of the situation, as they are all man-made principles. Talking about the fifth point, which is mainly behavioral. Since the principles aim at influencing complex human behavior, they are behavioral in nature. Moving on, talking about cause and effect relationship. So, principles intend to establish a relationship between cause and effect so that they can be used in similar situations. Moving on to the next point, contingent. Principles of management and its applicability depends on the prevailing situation at a particular point of time. According to Terry, management principles are capsules of selected management wisdom to be used carefully and discreetly. Now, let us talk about the significance of principles of management. So the first significance talks about providing managers with useful insights into reality. The second talks about optimum utilization of resources and effective administration. The third talks about scientific decisions. The fourth talks about meeting the changing environmental requirements. The fourth talks about fulfilling social responsibility. And the fifth significance talks about management training, education, and research. Now let us look into these principles in detail. So the first significance talks about providing managers with useful insights into reality. Dear students, management principles guide managers to take a right decision at right time by improving their knowledge, ability, and understanding of various managerial situations and circumstances. Now let us talk about the second significance, which is optimum utilization of resources and effective administration. Management principles facilitate optimum use of resources, and how this is done? This is done by coordinating the physical, financial and human resources. They also help in better administration by discouraging personal prejudices and adopting an objective approach. Moving on to the third point, which talks about scientific decisions. So here, principles of management and the decision is based on more realistic, balanced, and it is free from any personal bias. Moving on to the next point, which talks about meeting the changing environmental requirements. So, management principles provide an effective and dynamic leadership, and it helps the organization to implement the changes. Moving on to the next point, fulfilling social responsibility. Principles of management not only help in achieving organizational goals, but they also guide managers in performing social responsibility. Example, equity and fair remuneration. Let's talk about the sixth point, management training, education and research. So management principles are very helpful in identifying the key areas in which existing and future managers should be trained. They also provide the basis for any future research. Now, let's talk about this great gentleman who is called as Henry Fayol. Henry Fayol was a French mining engineer. He worked in the mining company. He also became the managing director of that company. He has written a book called as General and Industrial Management. He is also called as the father of modern management. He has propounded 14 principles of management. Now let us list down these 14 principles, which starts with division of work, authority, discipline, unity of command, unity of direction, order, scalar chain, centralization, remuneration, interest, equity, stability, initiative, and esprit de corps. Now let us talk about each of these principles in detail. So the first principle is division of work. In this principle, work is divided into small tasks, job, and each worker is trained. He is a specialist, which leads to greater efficiency, specialization, increased productivity, and also helps in reduction of unnecessary wastage and movements. Talking about the second principle, which talks about authority and responsibility. Now let us understand. So here, authority means the power to take decisions, and responsibility means an obligation to complete the job assigned on time. Authority and responsibility should go hand in hand. Mere responsibility without authority makes an executive less interested in discharging his duties. Similarly, giving authority without assigning responsibility makes him arrogant, and there is a fear of misuse of power. Moving on to unity of command, what does it mean? It implies that every worker should receive orders and instructions from one superior only. Otherwise, it will create confusion, conflict of interest, disturbance, and it will also lead to overlapping of activities. Let's move on to the next principle, which is called as unity of direction. Now, in this case, each group of activities having the same objective must have one head and one plan. This principle ensures unity of action and better coordination. Moving on to the sixth point, which talks about subordination of individual interest to general interest. Now, dear students, the interest of an organization should take top priority over the interest of any one individual employee. Now, you have a lot of questions in the examination which ask you for the difference between unity of command and unity of direction. So, I would request you to answer this question in the form of a table. So, put the basis on one side and then compare unity of command and unity of direction. So, let us talk about the first basis, which is called as meaning. And here, when I talk about unity of command, it means that a subordinate should receive order and instruction from only one boss. Now, let's move on to unity of direction. It means one head, one plan for a group of activities having similar objectives. Moving on to the nature, it is related to the functioning of people. Here we are talking about unity of command, whereas in unity of direction, it is related to the functioning of departments or the organization as a whole. It has a broader view. Let's talk about the third basis, which is called as necessity. In unity of command, it is necessary for fixing responsibility of each subordinates. However, in unity of direction, it is necessary for sound organization. Now, let's move to the fourth basis, which is called as advantage. In unity of command, it avoids conflict and confusion and chaos. In unity of direction, it avoids duplication of efforts and wastage of resources. Now, let's talk about the last basis, that is called as result. Here, it leads to better superior subordinate relationship. In unity of direction, it leads to smooth running of the enterprise. Now, let's move on to the seventh principle of Henry Fayol, which is called as remuneration of employees. Now, the overall pay and compensation should be fair to both employees and the organization. The wages should encourage the workers to work more and better. Let's talk about the eighth point, which talks about centralization and decentralization. So, dear students, centralization means concentration of decision-making authority in few hands at the top level. In fact, we can call them as the board of directors. However, decentralization means evenly distribution of power at every level of management. Both should be completely centralized or completely be balanced, as no organization can be completely centralized or completely decentralized. Moving on to the ninth point, which talks about scalar chain. Now, dear students, the formal line of authority between superiors and subordinates from the highest to the lowest rank is known as scalar chain. This chain should not be violated, but in emergency, employees at the same level can contact through gangplank by informing their immediate superior. Now, let's move on to the next point that talks about equity. And what do you understand from this? The working environment of any organization should be free from all forms of discrimination. be it on the basis of religion, language, caste, sex, belief, or basis unity of command, unity of direction, or nationality. And principles of justice and fair play should be followed. No worker should be unduly favored or punished. Now let's talk about stability of personnel. What does it mean? After being selected and appointed by rigorous procedure, the selected person should be kept at the post for a minimum period to show the result. Let's talk about the next principle, that is called as initiative. Workers should be encouraged to develop and carry out their plan for improvements. Initiative means taking the first step with self-motivation. It is thinking out and executing the plan. Now let's talk about the 14th principle of Henry Fayol, which talks about esprit de corps. Now dear students, management should promote team spirit, unity and harmony among employees. Management should promote a team effort. Thank you dear students for being patient. I'll catch you in a new video on scientific principles of management.